He was a man forged in the deserts of Afghanistan and the jungles of places that didn't appear on maps, a guardian shaped by fire and pressure. Yet the quiet waters of the Puget Sound were a more suffocating cage than any war zone. For Senior Chief Silas Kane, leave wasn't a reprieve, it was a purgatory. The fog of peace was thicker than any smokescreen, blurring the lines between the man and the operator. The world moved too slowly. People spoke in circles. There was no clear objective, no defined threat, no target to acquire. He was a weapon without a war, a protector without a charge. His only anchor was the 70-pound Belgian Malinois sitting silently at his feet in the small fishing boat. Odin, his K9 partner, was more than a dog. He was a living extension of Silas's own soul, a silent witness to the horrors they had survived and the quiet loyalty that bound them. The rhythmic thump of the boat's small engine was a poor substitute for the whomp of helicopter blades, the salty mist a cold reminder that he was adrift. He scanned the shoreline not as a tourist, but as an operator, his eyes cataloguing every cove, every tree line, every potential ingress and egress point. It was a habit he couldn't break, a part of the programming that kept him alive. He was searching for a peace he wasn't sure he deserved, a sanctuary from the ghosts that walked with him in the daylight. That's when he saw it, a flicker of wrongness against the dense green tapestry of a small, privately owned island marked on his chart as Thorn Island. It was a flash of white, unnatural. He raised his binoculars, the lenses cutting through the haze. Letters, scrawled in what looked like white fabric or stone against the dark rocks of a secluded beach. SOS. The letters were a silent scream in the overwhelming quiet of the morning. His heart, which had been beating in a dull, steady rhythm of discontent, gave a single, hard kick. The fog in his mind burned away, replaced by the ice-cold focus of a mission. The world snapped into sharp relief. For a man who had dedicated his life to answering cries for help that no one else could hear, this was no choice. It was a summons. A man built for war, searching for peace, just unearthed a secret someone was willing to kill to keep buried. What would you do if you were the only one who saw the signal? Tell us where you are watching from in the comments, because tonight a storm is coming to this quiet island sanctuary. God blesses you and your families. Amen. The decision was not a decision at all. It was an instinct, a reflex honed over a decade of service where hesitation meant death. Silas cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the whisper of the wind and the gentle lap of water against the hull. He looked down at Odin. The dog's intelligent eyes were already fixed on him, head cocked, ears erect. Odin felt the shift, the instantaneous transformation from drifting civilian to focused operator. Silas gave a low, all-quiet command. Watch. Odin didn't move, but his posture became even more alert, his gaze sweeping the island's shore with an intensity that mirrored his handlers. Silas pulled his boat behind a small, rocky outcropping, dropping a quiet anchor. The island was listed as private property, belonging to Thorn Industries, a massive Seattle-based tech and biomedical conglomerate. Trespassing was the least of his concerns. An SOS was a sacred call. He stripped off his civilian jacket, revealing the dark, functional layers beneath. From a waterproof Pelican case tucked under a seat, he retrieved his gear. It wasn't his full kit, but a carefully selected go bag he never traveled without. A suppressed pistol, extra magazines, a combat knife, a small medkit, and a compact thermal monocular. His movements were economical and precise, each action flowing into the next with practiced efficiency. He clipped a tactical harness onto Odin, the familiar clicks of the buckles a quiet prelude to action. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. It was the most he had spoken all day, and the words were for his partner. He ran a hand over Odin's powerful shoulders, a gesture of both command and affection. Quiet work. He slung a small, waterproof pack over his shoulder and slipped over the side of the boat into the shockingly cold water. He didn't gasp, didn't flinch. The cold was just another piece of sensory data to be filed and ignored. He and Odin swam the 50 yards to the shore, moving with a synchronized grace that made them little more than a shadow on the water's surface. They emerged from the water like phantoms, dripping and silent, melting into the deep shadows of the tree line just above the rocky beach. The SOS was stark up close, made of torn strips of what looked like a white lab coat, weighted down by stones. A desperate, intelligent signal, not a panicked scrawl. He knelt, his fingers barely grazing the damp ground. He saw it immediately, a set of footprints, partially washed away by the tide, and alongside them the distinct four-toed print of a dog. But there was something else, a single, deeper impression, the clear, sharp tread of a combat-style boot, but not one he recognized from any standard military issue. It was expensive, private market. This sanctuary was compromised. Someone was here, and they didn't want to be found. The forest was a wall of ancient cedar and Douglas fir, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. Silas moved through the undergrowth with a predatory stillness, Odin at his heel, a dark shape flowing through the ferns without a sound. Every snapped twig, every bird call was information. The island was alive, and it was talking to him. His focus was absolute, the internal noise of his civilian life silenced. Here, there was only the mission: locate the source of the signal, assess the threat, and act. He was a protector again. The thought settled in his soul, not with warmth, but with a chilling certainty. This was who he was. 20 minutes in, Odin stopped. The dog didn't growl, didn't bark. His body simply went rigid, his muzzle pointed toward a faint game trail, veering off to the right. Silas went low, placing a hand on Odin's back, feeling the tightly coiled muscle. He peered through the dense foliage, his eyes tracing the path. Nothing. He trusted the dog. He unclipped the thermal monocular and raised it to his eye. The world turned into a shifting landscape of heat signatures, the cool blues and greens of the forest, and then a warm man-shaped smudge of orange and yellow, 80 meters out, partially obscured by a thicket of salal bushes. The figure was stationary, leaning against a tree, holding a rifle, a sentry. Silas motioned for Odin to stay, a single, precise hand signal. The dog sank to the ground, utterly motionless, becoming one with the shadows. Silas began his approach, a ghost moving through the woods. He didn't make a sound, his feet finding purchase on soft moss and damp soil. He moved in a wide, flanking arc, using the terrain for cover, his breathing slow and controlled. The sentry was professional, but comfortable. His posture was relaxed, his attention divided between the trail and a device in his hand. Arrogance. It was a fatal flaw. Silas closed the final 10 feet in a silent rush. He didn't use his knife, didn't use his gun. His left hand clamped over the man's mouth, stifling any cry, while his right forearm snaked around the man's throat, applying a perfectly calibrated, carotid restraint. The man struggled for a few brief, panicked seconds before his body went limp. Silas lowered him gently to the ground, his eyes already scanning the surrounding woods for other threats. Clear. He zip-tied the man's hands and feet, placing a gag in his mouth. He wasn't a killer without cause. He was an operator. Information was the priority. He checked the man's gear. The rifle was a high-end European model, suppressed. The pistol was a custom Glock, and in his hand was the device, a satellite comms unit, encrypted. A small screen displayed a rotating patrol schematic of the island. This was no kidnapping by amateurs. This was a corporate-funded paramilitary operation. The stakes had just escalated from a rescue to an invasion. He was alone, deep inside a well-defended enemy sanctuary. He felt a grim smile touch his lips. Finally, a fair fight. He left the neutralized guard secured and hidden, taking the SATCOM unit with him. The device was a treasure map, displaying the patrol routes and the location of a central structure deep in the island's interior. A compound. Odin rejoined him, a low whine of approval rumbling in his chest. Silas gave him a quick, appreciative scratch behind the ears. Good boy. Now the real work. They moved faster now, using the captured schematic to avoid the other two-man patrol teams sweeping the island's perimeter. The compound wasn't a rustic cabin. It was a low-profile, modern structure built with reinforced concrete and tinted ballistic glass, designed to blend into the hillside. It was a fortress disguised as a retreat. From a ridge 200 yards away, concealed in a dense cluster of rock and overgrown rhododendron, Silas set up his observation post. He used his binoculars, dialing in the focus. 2 more guards patrolled the exterior, armed with the same high-end weaponry. They moved with the lazy confidence of men who believed they were untouchable. Then he saw her. Through a large pane of glass in what looked like a common area, a woman paced back and forth like a caged wolf. She had dark hair, pulled back in a severe ponytail, a sharp, intelligent face, and eyes that burned with a cold fire. She wasn't weeping or afraid. She was furious. She wore the tattered remains of a white lab coat over dark pants, the source of the SOS. She was the one. As he watched, a man entered the room. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that looked absurdly out of place in the rugged setting. He radiated an aura of slick, unearned authority. He and the woman faced off, their body language crackling with animosity. Even from this distance, Silas could feel the venom in their exchange. The man, his posture arrogant, his gestures dismissive, was clearly in charge. He was the foil to her defiant strength. This was the antagonist. The man gestured around the opulent room, then back at her, his expression a mask of condescending frustration. He was trying to persuade, or threaten, her into compliance. She just shook her head, her jaw set like granite. Silas watched her, a flicker of recognition passing through him. He knew that look. He had seen it in the eyes of captured rangers, of defiant village elders, of fellow SEALs. It was the look of someone who would die before they would break. It was the look of a warrior. The man in the suit's face twisted in anger. He stepped closer, his voice, even unheard, taking on a sharper, more menacing tone. She didn't flinch. She stood her ground, a lone protector of some unseen principle. Silas adjusted his focus, trying to read their lips. The man's mouth formed a name. Aris. Then he said something else, a phrase that hung in the air with the weight of a threat. Our father's legacy. The woman, Aris, responded with a single, sharp word that needed no translation. Never. The man stormed out of the room, leaving her alone once more. Silas lowered his binoculars. Aris Thorne. He knew the name. Dr. Aris Thorne, the brilliant, reclusive daughter of the late titan of industry, Alistair Thorne. And the man in the suit could only be her brother, Marcus Thorne, the company's new CEO. This wasn't a kidnapping for ransom. This was a family feud turned into a private war over a legacy worth billions. Silas now had his targets, he had his objective, and he had found his charge. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The approaching dusk was his ally. Night was the operator's cloak. Silas lay motionless, his mind a whirring calculator of risk and opportunity. The compound had 4 visible guards on the exterior, plus the 2 he knew were on patrol. He assumed at least 2 more inside with Marcus and Aris, a total of 8, maybe 9 hostiles, against him and Odin. The odds were poor. He preferred it that way. Complacency was a luxury he never afforded himself, and poor odds sharpened his focus to a razor's edge. He pulled out the captured SATCOM. He couldn't break the encryption, not without tools he didn't have, but he could study the patrol patterns. They were predictable, looping every 90 minutes. A 15-minute window existed at the northwest corner of the compound where patrol paths diverged, leaving a blind spot. That was his infiltration point. The building itself was a challenge. Concrete walls, ballistic glass. But the roof had vents for the HVAC system and a satellite array. Maintenance points, weaknesses. His plan began to form, not in words, but in a series of fluid, interconnected images. A silent climb, the disabling of a camera, the whisper-quiet removal of a vent cover, a descent into the darkness of the building's crawl spaces. It was audacious, bordering on suicidal. It was perfect. He looked at Odin. The dog had been lying beside him, a statue of patient energy. Silas met his gaze, and a silent conversation passed between them. It was a language of shared experience, of absolute trust. He laid out the mental map for the dog, not with words, but with minute gestures and shifts in his own energy. We go here. You wait here. On my signal you create a diversion. Fast, loud. Then you vanish and meet me at the extraction point. Odin gave a nearly imperceptible nod of his head, a low rumble in his chest, the only confirmation needed. He understood. He was not just a dog. He was a force multiplier, a loyal partner who would follow him into the gates of hell and ask for more. As the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the Olympic mountains, plunging the island into a deep, velvety darkness, Silas and Odin began to move. They flowed down the ridge like water, using every shadow, every sound of the wind in the trees to mask their approach. The air grew colder, the tension of physical presence. This was the moment before the breach, the terrifying, sacred silence before the storm. He felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, not a frantic panic, but a cold, concentrated rage that brought with it an almost supernatural clarity. The fog of leave was gone. The protector was awake. He placed a hand on the cold concrete wall of the compound, a silent promise to the woman inside. The sanctuary had been violated. He was here to reclaim it. The northwest corner was as the schematic predicted, a blind spot of shadow and overgrown ferns. A single security camera was mounted high on the wall, its small red light a malevolent eye. Silas unslung his pack. From it, he took a small, powerful, handheld laser. He aimed, and a pinpoint of intense green light hit the camera's lens. The electronics inside would be fried. A simple, effective, and silent solution. He holstered the laser and looked up. A thick drain pipe ran up the side of the wall, leading toward the roof. It would have to do. He gave Odin a final signal. Wait. Watch. The dog melted into a thicket of bushes, invisible. Silas took a deep breath and began to climb. His fingers and feet found purchase on the pipe's brackets, his movements economical and sure. He was a wraith ascending the wall, his dark form barely distinguishable from the deep shadows. He reached the roofline and hauled himself over the edge, landing in a silent crouch. He was exposed here. He moved quickly to the largest HVAC unit, his knife already in his hand. The screws on the main vent cover were standard. 2 minutes of quiet, deliberate work, and the large metal grate was free. A black square yawned before him, a direct route into the building's ductwork. He peered inside. It was tight, but navigable. He slipped through the opening, pulling the grate back into place behind him. He was in. The world became a claustrophobic maze of metal shafts, the distant hum of machinery his only companion. He moved by touch and memory, crawling through the darkness. The schematic of the building burned into his mind. He paused above what he calculated was the main hallway. Near the room where Eris was being held, he could hear voices below. Marcus's, sharp and impatient, and another, rougher voice. The lead mercenary. Silas moved to a position directly over the common area. Through the slats of a ventilation shaft, he could see them. Eris was seated, her expression unreadable. Marcus stood over her, his expensive suit now looking rumpled. A large, brutish man with a shaved head and a cruel smile stood by the door. That was his first interior target. It was time. Silas held a small, custom-made transmitter. He pressed the button. Miles away, on his boat, a preset timer he'd activated would be sending a looped distress call to the Coast Guard, but on a channel he knew was monitored by corporate security firms. A false flag. It would draw attention, but not the right kind, creating confusion. Then he keyed his own comms unit, a simple one-way device clipped to Odin's harness. He sent a single pre-recorded sound, the ferocious, snarling bark of a K9 unit making a strike. The sound erupted from the bushes on the far side of the compound. It was chaos in a box. The guards outside shouted. The mercenary inside stiffened, his head snapping toward the sound. What was that? Marcus looked panicked. They're here. How did they find us? The mercenary spoke into his radio, his voice tight. East perimeter, sound off. What is it? The distraction was working. Silas took his chance. He kicked the vent cover beneath him. It flew off its hinges and crashed to the floor below. Before anyone could react, he dropped from the ceiling, landing in a perfect combat roll. He came up with his pistol in hand. 2 suppressed shots, so close they sounded like one. Thwip, thwip. The mercenary by the door crumpled to the floor, a neat hole in his center mass. Before Marcus could even process what was happening, Silas had crossed the room, grabbing Eris by the arm. Her eyes, wide with shock, met his. There was no fear in them, only a dawning, fierce understanding. "Who are you?" she breathed. "I saw your signal," he said, his voice a low growl. "We're leaving. Now." The escape from the compound was a blur of controlled violence. As Silas pulled Eris toward the shattered glass door leading to the patio, another guard, drawn by the commotion, rounded the corner. He didn't even have time to raise his rifle. Silas moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, not releasing Eris, but instead using their momentum to pivot. His pistol came up, Another quiet thwip, and the guard fell backward, his surprise etched permanently on his face. "This way," Silas commanded, his voice cutting through the ringing in Aris's ears. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of tactical precision. They burst out into the cool night air. Alarms began to blare across the compound, casting strobing red lights that sliced through the darkness. Shouts echoed from the woods. The hornet's nest had been kicked. "They'll be everywhere," Aris said, her voice strained but steady as they plunged into the tree line. "I know," Silas replied, his eyes constantly moving, scanning, assessing. "Keep up." He led them on a frantic, weaving path away from the compound, not back toward his boat, but deeper into the island's untamed interior. It was counterintuitive, the last thing their pursuers would expect. After 10 minutes of hard running, he found what he was looking for, a deep fissure in a rock face, partially hidden by a curtain of hanging moss. It was a small cave, barely a hollow in the stone. "In here." He pushed her gently inside, then motioned. Odin appeared from the darkness as if summoned, slipping into the cave behind them. The dog was panting slightly, but otherwise unharmed. Silas took up a position at the entrance, his pistol ready, listening to the sounds of the hunt fade into the distance. For now, they were safe. This was their temporary sanctuary. He turned, the adrenaline beginning to subside, and saw that Aris was staring at his left arm. A dark stain was spreading across his sleeve. A lucky shot from one of the guards had grazed him. "You're hit," she said, her voice shifting from fugitive to physician. "It's a scratch," he grunted, dismissing it. "Let me see." She was no longer asking. Her authority was as absolute as his had been moments before. She took a tactical flashlight from his pack and carefully sliced the fabric of his sleeve away with a small knife from her own pocket. The wound was a deep gash, bleeding freely. "This is not a scratch," she stated, her fingers probing the edges with professional detachment. She took his medkit, her movements swift and sure, as she cleaned the wound and applied a pressure dressing. "You're a doctor," he observed, his voice flat. "Among other things," she replied, her eyes meeting his in the dim light. "My turn. My brother Marcus. He's trying to sell our father's life's work, Project Chimera. It's a regenerative agent, designed to heal catastrophic injuries. My father intended it as a gift to the world, a legacy of healing. Marcus wants to sell it to the highest bidder as a combat enhancement drug. Create soldiers who can't be stopped." She paused, her hands tightening the bandage. "I was the ethical guardian of the project. I refused to release the final activation codes, so he brought me here to convince me." The betrayal was a raw wound in her voice. "He violated our father's sanctuary, his memory." Silas listened, his expression unreadable. He understood. The fight for a legacy, the role of a guardian. He was a protector who had lost his way, and here was a cause laid bare before him. A righteous fight. "He won't get it," Silas said. It wasn't a promise. It was a statement of fact. The fragile peace of their sanctuary was short-lived. The lull in the hunt was Marcus reorganizing, not retreating. Silas knew the type. Men like Marcus Thorne didn't accept defeat. They doubled down. Failure was an insult to their ego, and their response would be disproportionate and brutal. He could feel the shift in the island's atmosphere. The random shouts and panicked movements of the guards were replaced by a cold, systematic sweep. Marcus, enraged and humiliated, had unleashed his entire security force with one simple command: kill the intruders and recover his sister. The island was no longer just a setting, it was a prison, and they were its most wanted fugitives. "They're organized now," Silas said, peering through a tiny gap in the moss curtain. He could see the beams of powerful flashlights cutting methodical swaths through the forest. "They're using a grid search pattern. They'll find this place by dawn." Aris finished securing the bandage on his arm. "So we run." "No," Silas said, turning to face her. The dim light cast his face in harsh angles. "We don't run, we move. There's a difference. Running is fear. Moving is purpose." He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fire in her, the same defiant spark he'd seen through his binoculars. She wasn't a liability. She was an asset waiting to be activated. "You were an Army Ranger, weren't you, before medical school?" It wasn't a question. He had seen it in the way she moved, the way her eyes missed nothing, the way she handled the knife with familiar ease. Aris nodded slowly. "A long time ago. I served 2 tours as a medic with the 75th. "It's like riding a bike," Silas said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Time to remember." For the next hour, in the cramped confines of the cave, the SEAL gave the former ranger a crash course in evasion. He showed her how to use the terrain, how to read the wind to mask their scent from any dogs they might be using, how to move from shadow to shadow. He was no longer just her rescuer. He was her commanding officer. She absorbed it all, her sharp intellect grasping the tactical concepts with an unnerving speed. The doctor's precision was now applied to the science of survival. They were becoming a team, their shared military past a bridge between their 2 worlds. Odin lay between them, a silent, watchful guardian, his presence a comforting weight in the suffocating tension. Silas felt a strange sense of belonging he hadn't experienced since his last deployment. He was a protector again, not just of a person, but of a principle. Aris was the guardian of her father's legacy, a legacy of healing and hope. And he, Silas, would be the guardian of the guardian. The roles were clear. The objective was defined. The hunt intensified outside. A group of guards passed so close to their hiding spot that they could hear their muttered curses and the crackle of their radios. Silas and Aris held their breath, motionless, Odin's body rigid beside them. The moment passed. The hunters moved on. "It's time," Silas whispered. "Time to move." They slipped out of the cave, 2 ghosts merging with the night, the hunted preparing to turn the tables on the hunters. They moved north, toward the highest point on the island, a rocky promontory where an old, decommissioned lighthouse stood skeletal against the night sky. It was the most obvious and dangerous place to go, which was precisely why Silas chose it. Marcus would expect them to head for the water, for escape. Silas had no intention of escaping. Not yet. "Why are we going up?" Aris whispered, her breathing controlled as they navigated a steep, treacherous incline. "We need to get the data," Silas said simply. "The activation codes for Chimera. Where are they?" "Not on me," she replied. "I'm not an idiot. They're on a microdrive, hidden in the sanctuary, as my father called it, a small memorial he built for my mother. It's near the lighthouse." "Then that's where we're going," Silas confirmed. "But we're not just going to walk in and get it. We're going to set a trap. We're going to use their aggression and predictability against them." His mind was already working, laying out the kill box. The lighthouse was a perfect choke point. The single path leading up to it was narrow, with steep drop-offs on either side. It was a fatal funnel. As they neared the summit, they found the memorial. It was a simple, elegant bench made of weathered stone, overlooking the vast, dark expanse of the Sound. In a small, hidden recess beneath the seat, Aris retrieved a tiny, metallic object. The micro-drive, the legacy. "Got it," she said, securing it in a zippered pocket. "Now what?" "Now," Silas said, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "We hunt." He explained the plan, his voice low and urgent. It was simple, brutal, and relied on perfect timing. He would be the bait. Aris and Odin would be the hammer. The final confrontation took place 20 minutes later. Silas allowed himself to be seen, a fleeting shadow moving near the base of the lighthouse. The radio traffic, which he monitored on the captured comms unit, erupted. "Target spotted. Lighthouse. All units converge." Marcus, his voice shrill with triumph, came over the channel. "Take him. I want him alive." The lead mercenary, a new one, colder and more professional than the last, responded. "Copy. Moving to intercept." 2 guards, followed by the lead merc, charged up the narrow path. They moved quickly, rifles up, confident their prey was cornered. That was their mistake. As they rounded the final bend, Silas opened fire from behind the lighthouse door, not to kill, but to suppress, forcing them to take cover behind a cluster of rocks. It was the signal. From the shadows above them, a massive form launched itself through the air. Odin, a 70-pound missile of fur and fury, slammed into the rear guard, his jaws locking onto the man's rifle arm. The man screamed, his weapon clattering to the ground. At the same instant, Aris, positioned on a ledge above the path, pushed a precariously balanced pile of loose rocks and debris. The small avalanche cascaded down, not burying the lead merc, but forcing him to stumble forward, out of cover and into Silas's direct line of sight. Thwip! The merc dropped without a sound. Silas emerged from the lighthouse, his pistol leveled at the last remaining guard, who was desperately trying to fight off Odin. "Down," Silas commanded. The guard froze, then slowly raised his hands. Just then, Marcus Thorne appeared at the bottom of the path, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "You," he screamed, pulling a small silver pistol from his suit jacket. He wasn't a soldier. His hands were shaking. He aimed at Silas. "You ruined everything." Before he could fire, Aris stepped out from the shadows beside him. In her hand was a medical syringe she'd taken from the compound. "It's over, Marcus." Marcus swung the gun toward his sister. "You did this." In that split second, Silas saw the end game. He didn't shoot Marcus. He aimed his pistol at the ground beside Marcus's expensive leather shoe and fired. The bullet ricocheted off the rock, sending shards of stone stinging into Marcus's leg. He yelped and dropped the gun, hopping in pain and shock. It was over. Not with a bang, but with the pathetic cry of a spoiled tyrant. The wail of a siren cut through the pre-dawn stillness, growing steadily louder. The Coast Guard cutter, responding to the delayed distress signals Silas had orchestrated, was arriving. Its powerful searchlight swept across the island, finally settling on the dramatic scene at the old lighthouse. Marcus Thorne was sitting on the ground, nursing his peppered ankle, his tailored suit now filthy and torn. The remaining guards were secured with their own restraints. Aris stood watching the approaching boat, the micro-drive safe in her pocket, her father's legacy secured. She was no longer a victim, but a victor, the quiet strength in her posture a testament to the warrior she had rediscovered within herself. Silas stood apart, leaning against the cold stone of the lighthouse, Odin sitting faithfully at his side. He watched the official uniforms swarm the area, taking control, cuffing Marcus, securing the scene. His part in this was over. He was a ghost again, ready to fade back into the shadows. An FBI agent, part of a tactical team that came with the cutter, approached him. "Sir, we're going to need a full statement." Silas just nodded. He would give them a version of the truth, enough to ensure Marcus Thorne would face justice for kidnapping and assault, enough to protect Aris. The details of his own involvement would remain shrouded in the fog of plausible deniability. He was a protector, not a glory seeker. Later, as the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the water, Aris found him by the stone memorial. The chaos was over. The authorities were mopping up. "They're taking him to Seattle," she said quietly. "He'll face charges. The board of Thorne Industries is already in damage control. The Chimera project will be safe. My father's work will be used as he intended." "Good," Silas said. It was all that needed to be said. An uncomfortable silence settled between them, charged with everything they had endured. They were from different worlds, a SEAL and a scientist, yet bound by the crucible of the last 12 hours. "What will you do now?" she asked, her gaze searching his. "My leave is almost over," he said, his eyes on the horizon. "There's always another fire to put out." It was a deflection, but she understood. He was a man who needed a mission. "If you ever find yourself in need of a sanctuary," she said, her voice soft, "or a doctor who knows how to handle a scratch, you know how to find me." He gave a rare, small smile. "Copy that." He turned and walked away, Odin trotting at his heel. He didn't look back. An hour later he was back on his small boat, the engine thrumming, heading out into the open water. The island, the compound, the fight. It all receded behind him. Odin rested his head on Silas's knee, and Silas stroked the dog's fur, his touch more gentle than before. The rising sun warmed his face. He hadn't found the quiet, passive peace he thought he was looking for. He had found something better. He had found purpose. He was a guardian, a protector. The fog in his mind was gone, replaced by a clean, sharp certainty. He had answered the call. That was all the peace he would ever need. A single act of courage can change the world for one person. It can protect a legacy and restore a sanctuary. Have you ever been a guardian for someone in need? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of loyalty and protection, comment Amen. We pray that God blesses you and your families, and that you always have the strength to answer the call.